Everybody needs an advocate.
Because I'm not there 24/7.
Families that have hemophilia mature faster.
I've been feeling a lot of anxiety lately.
I'm so tired of being strong.
To understand how far we've come helps you appreciate where we are now.
No is just no for this person. Somebody's gonna say yes sooner or later.
And it helps you understand that there are more steps to be taken in the future.
You're the first person I've met with a bleeding disorder.
Let's fight the disease and not the people who have it.
All right, so Preston, you are 19.
Yes.
You have moderate hemophilia A.
Yep.
You are the oldest of 5 boys, one of which also has hemophilia.
Mm-hmm.
But you had no prior family history, right? And as the oldest, there was no kind of warning signs that you might have a bleeding disorder. Is that right?
Well, when I was born, about 15 months old, I was bleeding out of like every pore in my body. And they tested me for a whole bunch of bleeding disorders. And unfortunately, they never tested me for hemophilia.
And what did lead to your diagnosis?
My younger brother had tonsil surgery, and I think he had 3 surgeries. He had 7 surgeries.
Seeking like help from the background there.
Yeah. So yeah, he had 7 tonsil surgeries, and he tested positive for hemophilia, and so they were like, well, that's what Preston has.
Do you remember being diagnosed? Do you remember that moment?
Not really.
Not particularly?
Because I didn't really know what it meant. I was still young, and I mean, there's so many things to learn at that age, and it was just another word I guess I didn't really understand. So
the family got involved in the community almost right away, right?
Yes.
And what were your first experiences with the community, coming to events like this, going to camp? Tell us a little bit about your first experiences.
It was a great experience. I mean, we went to a bunch of camps in Utah, and it was really nice to be around the kids that had hemophilia, and it felt good to not be so different.
I think you had mentioned that some of the friendships that you had made there have carried over and have been long-lasting friendships. Is that right?
Yes.
What do you think the value of those friendships are? As you said, it's nice to meet people that have what you have. What are the value of those relationships to you in particular?
Well, they come more like family. I mean, lots of you guys here, we see you guys so much, and like it's kind of like a family reunion, I guess, you know?
What age were you when you first started going to camp?
I believe I was like 10. Let's see.
Verification from the crowd? 10.
10.
We'll go with 10.
It was 10. Yes, I was 10.
What's the game? What is that? Like, ask the audience? What game show is that where it's like, what's the answer to this question, audience?
Yeah.
And you're now a volunteer at camp. When did you start volunteering at camp?
I think it was around 16.
Okay, so it's been a few years.
Yeah.
I remember very vividly my first summer at my camp, going from being a camper to now I am a leader in training, or an LIT, and how it kind of felt like I know this place really well, but this all seems a little different now, and just kind of feeling like I really didn't have a great sense of like, am I doing a good job? Like, I don't really know what a counselor does. I've only ever been in the other role. Did you have any of that when you first started in this new role?
Not really. I had a lot of good guidance, and a lot of the older adults were just like, do this and you'll be fine.
So let's talk a little about school growing up. One of the things that you had shared with me that stood out was always wanting to be involved in football, and I'm sure there were other things as well that hemophilia did not quite allow. Talk a little about like what that experience was, the feelings that stimulated in you, and how you managed not being able to participate in these things that you really wanted to.
Probably still to this day, my favorite sport is football, and unfortunately all I can do is watch it. I went to a doctor's appointment, and he's like, you definitely cannot play football. And I just remember how hard that was, because that really made me feel different, because like I wanted to play, but I couldn't, and all my friends were doing it. I have hemophilia, and there's no going around it. And so I might as well just accept it and what comes with it and what I can't do and what I can do.
That's very well said, by the way. There's no going around it. But it doesn't mean it won't continue to be challenging at times to like fully own that. I recently was like, I really can't run. I can move around really well, but I run, and at my size, with the amount of damage I've already done, like, it's bleed central. So I was like, all right, well, this is the age where I start eliminating running, and like that kind of feels not great. But like you said, there's no going around it, so I got to just find other outlets. And you found another outlet, especially once you had started prophylaxis. What shift did that cause in you when you had moved from an on-demand treatment regimen to a prophylactic regimen?
It allowed me to be more involved in sports. I was a big baseball player throughout high school, and just using Prophy, as I like to call it,
Well, a lot of people like to call it. I can't give you. You don't own that word. Prophy is it's a ubiquitously used word. I should use ubiquitous. That was pretty good. It's used everywhere. Okay, so we can't give you that word.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Fair enough. It just allowed me to keep my body healthier for longer amounts of time, and I was able to recover quicker, and it made me semi-normal, I guess, as the rest of the baseball team.
What about your brother? Because that's kind of interesting that, there's the 5 of you and 2 of you share, he's severe, right?
Yes.
What was it like kind of going on these parallel journeys, you and your brother?
I kind of felt fine with, being the big one, walking through, leading the way, even though, like, he's right there behind me, just because it made me feel a little bit better, so I wasn't doing it alone. But I know he's going through like the troubles right now with not being able to play football, and because he's at that age now that like they're starting that grid kid, but I'm excited for him to learn about his different passions in life, because like once I learned about my different passions and stuff, it made it a lot easier, because sometimes you're too invested in what you can't do and you don't realize all the things you can do.
That's also very well said, and actually that's something that Skyler and I had talked about, who's going to be up here in a little bit. Trying a little bit of everything. There's the things that when you have hemophilia you can't do, but try a little bit of everything to find the things that you can and the things that you respond well to. Yeah. You had some kind of firsthand experience with taking a look at what life in other parts of the world looks like. You mind sharing that story and that particular moment that you captured?
Yes, I was in Ecuador, and there was this little girl that had a cup of water, and I've never seen someone so happy, and she would run up to this cabinet, and she would just sit there and play with the water until splash it out until it was empty, and then she would sprint inside and go fill it up again, and then come right back out. And this went on for about 15 minutes, and like everyone nowadays is on their iPhones playing games and stuff, but then here's this little girl out there playing with a cup of water and having the time of her life. And it was a really humbling experience. And when I'm like, oh dang, I have to go get an infusion, I mean, someone out there would absolutely love that opportunity to have Factor when I'm like, I don't want to do it. But
my last question for you, and I meant to ask this earlier, you mentioned knowing a lot of people. Are there any families here who have not been to an event before with the Idaho chapter? Okay, a splattering of hands, nice. Well, welcome on behalf of the chapter. Is there anything that you would like to share? Going back to, as we talked about, you got that diagnosis, the family gets involved with the community, you start making friends, going to camp, getting connected to the resources that are available. Is there anything that you want to share with people who are at an event for the first time?
Really, hemophilia and like just even this chapter alone has been like just an amazing blessing on my life. And even if I had the opportunity to not take it or to take it, I think I'd take it just with everything that's come of it. And I mean, everyone's got their trials in their life, and if hemophilia is ours, then we're very lucky compared to other trials. And so honestly, just even with the family or the group that you meet with and the connections you make and the friendships and relationships that will last you a lifetime, it's a blessing.
Allie, you do not have von Willebrand disease. You do not have hemophilia. Would you like to say a little bit about what it is that you have?
Sure. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease, which I don't know if too many people know about here, but it's a disease that you get from a bite of a tick. And normally, it's a very easy disease to treat. You take a couple weeks of antibiotics, it's out of your system, you're fine. But I was not only diagnosed with Lyme, I was also diagnosed with Babesia, Bartonella, and Ehrlichia, which are 3 other tick-borne diseases that I was not tested for until almost 10 years into my battle with Lyme.
You have Lyme, and the work started in Lyme, but it then transitioned to kind of greater chronic diseases, and in particular, the invisible chronic diseases, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so a word that we often use to describe the groups of people that we work with is invisible disability. And disability is a word that I really sort of feared and stayed away from for a really long time, because I was like, I'm not disabled, I'm totally able. But the reality of the situation is that myself and many of the people who I work with are not always completely able-bodied, and we do need some extra help every once in a while, and I think navigating that space and finding that can be more challenging when your disability is something that people can't see when they look at you.
It's funny, it just reminded me, and I'm inclined to share, we do a monthly podcast, and I do it with my wife, and a few several months ago at some point. I forget how we got onto this, but she had said something about disability, and it was kind of like in my direction. It's like, do you consider me disabled? And she was like, well, sometimes yes, and sometimes no. And we've never talked about it since, actually. It'd be an interesting topic to come back to.
It's interesting, too, because I wonder in thinking back and thinking about my own experience, why was I so scared of that word? Like, is disability a bad thing? Like, why did I not want to have that label attached to me? And I think about that a lot. We've started working with mental illness, too. And in my own experience, a huge part of my dealing with the mental side of disease was really just pushing it away. I was like, forget that. Not going to deal with that. I'm physically sick, and that's the thing I need to take care of. Because I was so terrified of people being like, it's in your head, you're mentally sick. But thinking back now, why is it so bad to deal with mental health as well as physical health at the same time, especially when those two things tend to be so intertwined for so many of us?
Yeah, it's even funny the way we separate it and the way it's separated on insurance. It's like, do you need to see the eye doctor? Do you need to go to a hematologist? Do you need mental health? And it's kind of just like put over here in its own. It's all health. It's all part of what we need. And there's been more awareness within our community of the impact a bleeding disorder can have on one's mental health. And it's a topic that we don't talk about quite enough, I think. And couple that with pain management and some issues related to pain management, and it can be very damaging if you are silenced, if you don't talk about these things.
Yeah, I see that a lot in the Lyme world as well, especially because with Lyme or any sort of immune-related condition like a long-term infection, stress and emotional health tends to be a really big trigger for flares. So for example, in my first neurological flare, in just a month, I was struggling to read, I was struggling to speak, I was in 6 car accidents in 6 weeks. And this was all triggered by the fact that my family had recently moved away, my boyfriend had just gone to college, but I wasn't ready to conflate those two things in my experience yet.
So Allie participated in a Powering Through event for us about 2 years ago, like almost exactly. And the book, Suffering the Silence, was just about to come out at that time. Can you tell us a little bit about when it was released and the book tour you went on and what that led to?
Suffering the Silence came out in September of 2015. So I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the publication of the book. And I was lucky enough to go on a 9-city tour around the US where I met with a number of different Lyme patients, but also just members of the chronic illness and mental health community in general. And what I sort of realized on that was that it's true that I have Lyme disease and that's my diagnosis, but my experience of disease is really pretty much the same as most other people who are dealing with any sort of chronic health condition. And I saw these huge silos in the space, right? It's like, I'm really good at talking to other people who have Lyme disease, but when I'm feeling so isolated, why should I only be talking to them? Like, why not talk to people who can empathize and feel that same connection you were talking about and you were talking about when you travel with people who have hemophilia? I feel that with people who know what it's like to have to take care of your body more than the average person. And I was really sort of inspired to continue those conversations and create more opportunities for people to come together, sort of regardless of diagnosis, but more focused on the human experience of their condition.
And you had said something to me that jumped out about these live events, the power in seeing and connecting with people in person. Obviously, given what the kind of work we do and putting on programs like this, I believe wholly in that. What is particularly valuable based on what you've witnessed about the in-person experience of community building?
When you get to meet somebody in person, you get to see them as the whole person, as I said before, as this person who, I don't know, had too big of a lunch and is too full, or whatever it is. You see them as the human being, and just having a chance to sit there and talk to them and share a meal with them, I've seen that to be really transformative for many of the people who we talk to with Suffering the Silence.
So after that book tour, you took a little break because that's kind of an intense experience to come off of, so that makes sense. But then you decided to pivot your focus a little more to create more opportunities for these in-person experiences. Can you talk a little about that and some of the workshops or events that you've produced? Yeah, so in the last year, we started Suffering the Silence as its own nonprofit last September, so we're just coming up on 1 year as well with that. And since then, we've done, I think it's 8 events around the country, as well as a 5-day-long retreat. The events have really ranged from panel discussions about sort of
how to maintain healthy family dynamics to last night I was in Chicago for a storytelling night where we had 5 high school age young women tell their story to an audience of like over 50 people. So we're really just creating more and more opportunities for that story sharing. And I really think there's a huge power in just the opportunity to share your story and the process of sort of hearing yourself say it out loud.
One of the events you had put on, illness and identity, that kind of stuck out to me, the way you described the interplay between illness and identity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We had a photography show display at a gallery in New York City for a month this June, and it's actually going to Delaware, in Wilmington, Delaware in November for a 6-week run. And the show features portraits of 5 different patients, all of whom have different diagnoses, and pairs them with longer form interviews about their experience. And the real focus of those interviews is how is your diagnosis and your experience of disease informed by other aspects of your sense of self, like gender or race or socioeconomic class or sexuality. And it was really amazing to see the sort of intricacies and uniqueness, but also how similar so many of those experiences were across those intersectionalities.
Are there any particular similarities that were striking or things you couldn't have predicted, but actually in hearing people articulate, it's like, oh, that's quite similar, actually?
In almost every case, people felt like they didn't see themselves, before their diagnosis, people didn't see themselves reflected in what they thought of that disease. And this idea of not seeing yourself reflected or represented came up over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I've heard that within our community, and there's a guy, Justin Levesque. He talks a lot about that because, with bleeding disorders, we are very physically limited in many ways. So oftentimes, images of what life can look like depict physically active people, and that's great. But if that is all you see, and you say maybe have an inhibitor, and you're battling with that, and that aspirational sense of I can physically do these great things is not realistic, where do you see yourself in the materials that are out there? And he's very sensitive to that, and that's something that's, I think, an important thing for us to always be mindful of, and with the kind of work we do in making sure, are we representing the community at large, or only a segment that is convenient or close to us, or what have you?
We're trying to really do that as well with STS in terms of if you don't see yourself being represented, then speak up and become the advocate to represent yourself. And that can be scary and intimidating, but we all can do it.
You mentioned the 5 young women last night speaking to that group, and I know from our previous conversations, you had experienced, I'm just trying to think how to frame this, but that as a female, when you're trying to self-advocate, especially in a community that there's doubts about the legitimacy of the disease that you're speaking of to begin with, that you can be too easily dismissed or considered hysterical. What experiences have you had as a female advocate that have led you to that, and what have you done to combat that?
Yeah, I think the most formative experience I had was during that first neurological flare, where I was sitting across one of the best infectious disease specialists in the world. And he, as I started to articulate my experience, he cut me off about, no more than 15 seconds in, and just told me, you're wrong. It's physically impossible that you have this. I know better than you. And I remember being a 17-year-old girl sitting across from this big, important man, and I believed him, and I thought, who am I to say anything different than this person who has more authority than me? And I find, as I've moved into more of a role in an advocacy role, I still start to doubt myself. I spoke in front of Congressional Forum last May, and it was primarily men who were in the room, and I just had this thought of thinking, they just are gonna think I'm like a little kid, and they're gonna see me as a little girl and not somebody who really knows what she's talking about. I guess what I've done to combat that is just to learn that when I do speak up, and when other women who I'm around speak up and start to express what they're going through in an honest and well thought out way, I'm met by much more empathy and support than I fear that I won't be met with, or that I would be pushed back against. So I think you have to give people a chance to see you for the person who you are. And when they don't see you as that, you have to sort of brush it off and say, it's okay, the good people in the world will. But I just don't stop talking, and I don't stop reading, and it's probably annoying for people, but I think it's an important part of being a female advocate is just keep your mouth moving a lot.
last question. You had mentioned a popular theme that you were noticing across all these events, meeting people from all different chronic disease communities from the U.S. and abroad, was this idea of acceptance of the disease, of the struggle, of the hand that you're dealt. There's still a way to win. Can you say a little bit more about what that means? What does acceptance mean?
Yeah, I think Preston put it really well before. Many of us who deal with chronic illness have been dealt a bad hand, and it's not the hand that maybe our friends who are playing football got. But once we figure out and take a real look at what cards are in that hand, we can still play to win. But we're not able to play to win until we realize we haven't necessarily been dealt the right hand. And I think that that's been a huge part of my healing process is to realize what my limitations are, realize what my challenges are, but also then knowing that, find ways to overcome them. Things might take me a little longer than they take other people, but I'm finding ways to accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish even with this.
So Skyler, for those who don't know, you have factor 9 deficiency.
8.
Oh, you're factor 8?
Yes.
I just wrote this incorrectly then? Pardon me. Okay. Your name is Skyler, right?
Yes.
All right, good. I'm glad I got that part right.
I will only accept one mistake, so that's the last straw right there.
Well, we might have to keep this really short then, because I don't know if I can go mistake-free the rest of the way, but we'll try. You had no family history of hemophilia, right?
Nope.
Okay. Diagnosed as a baby, though, 4 weeks.
6
Something
weeks.
like that? I don't know where, I don't know what I was doing when I took these notes, Skyler. You're going to have to forgive me. You know what? Why don't you just tell everybody who you are? I'm going to go take a break. I'll come back later. So you were mentioning that you didn't really in school growing up, you didn't have too many really bad bleeds that kept you out. You didn't have to miss that many activities. By and large, it sounds like as a kid growing up, hemophilia was decently well managed, yeah?
We managed it well. I had it regularly. I have bleeds every once in a while, but not as much as I could have had.
Do you have a memory, like we were chatting with Preston earlier, about that first bad hip bleed and how that kind of leaves an impression? I have an ankle bleed story that's like, here we go. Like this is my bleed story. Do you have that like first bad bleed story?
I had a bleed on my foot once, and I went to the nurse about it, and she said, "Nah, you're fine." And I was like, "Oh no, I have hemophilia. I bleed, and it's changing colors a little bit." "No, you're fine." I waited the day, and then my grandma looked at it and said, "Yeah, that's a bleed. You should have been sent home or getting medicine right away."
So but you were just at school the rest of the day dealing with it?
Yeah, she told me to deal with it. She handed me like 3 ice cubes in a bag, and there you go.
On your way. Did you talk to this nurse again about like what hemophilia is, or what was the follow-up with this nurse?
Someone had to talk with her, because any other time I got hurt, she called my grandma and made sure I went home.
I have a feeling I know.
Someone had to talk.
Yeah, I think Grandma had a talk with her is what I would guess would happen. Grandma made sure that didn't happen again. You're currently learning to self-infuse, is that right?
Learning, yes.
Yeah. How's that going?
Okay, I know how to set everything up.
Okay.
Just poking myself. I have poked, I have never hit it.
And why do you think that is?
We did like a target thing. We put the black ink there, hoping I would hit that. Still off.
So just gotta keep practicing. Practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. You don't really like the idea of self-infusing too much, I don't think.
No, if there was a pill for it, I would take the pill, because I know where that can go, and I don't miss.
So something that you had said to me stood out about school. So not the nurse who doesn't recognize that a foot changing color is probably a problem that needs more than 3 ice cubes, but you had mentioned with your physical education teacher some challenges in kind of getting on the same page, so to speak. Would you share your experience with everybody?
If I hurt my leg or foot, and he didn't really care about doctor's notes, either you did it or you just walked in a circle around the gym the whole time. If you didn't do, or if you missed the day because of it, you would have to write a whole paper.
That kind of made me sad to hear, to be honest, when you shared that with me over the phone. Another thing that really struck me from our conversation was, let's actually keep in school for a minute, because I'd referenced earlier what you had said about try a little bit of everything to find what you love. Talk a little bit about what you found that you're responding really well to and want to pursue professionally, from what I understand.
I really enjoy filming, and I didn't think I would like it at all, just sitting there holding a camera. but there's a lot more into it than just that, and it's something like I found out I'm pretty good at it, at least I think.
So something else that struck me, though, is while maybe hemophilia growing up didn't present you with a tremendous amount of challenges, so to speak, there were other challenges that were a part of your family and growing up with your brother. Would you mind sharing some of that?
My brother Caleb, some of you may know him, he has autism and Fragile X, and he needs help tying his shoes or cutting his food, showers, whatever, and just something I had to help him with, and done it almost all my life.
And you've been helping him all your life, in part because for a long time you were kind of his caregiver in a way, right?
I felt kind of like a dad to him and taking care of him, feeding him, and things like that.
And at what age did you start feeling like a dad?
Probably about 8 or 9.
Do you remember a particular moment where you realized, you know what, I'm gonna have to step up my dad game, even though I'm 8?
When he didn't shower for a few days, he started stinking.
Necessity kicked in. And how does Caleb respond to you helping him out so much? Is he always receptive? Is it ever challenging?
He likes to do what he can by himself. I don't blame him, but I practice things with a lot, and more he learns how, and he's pretty good about when I need to help him when he's not doing it right. He lets me.
That's got to be tough at such a young age, as we were kind of joking about earlier. At 8 years old, you got a lot ahead of you, you got a lot to learn, and you're taking on this big responsibility. How did you kind of manage that at 8 years old? There must have been moments where you were frustrated, overwhelmed, where you didn't know what to do because you're only 8. Like, how did you handle that?
Learned from what my parents did do when they did it, and I tried to mimic that. Or if we would go to other families' homes to visit, watch them, what they do, and try to do that.
Was there any situation that you and your brother kind of got yourselves into that it was like the premise of a sitcom?
I was trying to learn how to do the laundry, and I didn't know what buttons to push. I just started pushing buttons, and it started leaking onto the floor.
Fair enough. By the way, I hope you don't mind my sharing this, but this is impressive to me. Skyler also just had surgery, and until this morning, was not able to move his top lip, and only just got permission, and still decided to come through and participate in this and speak with everybody and make jokes at my expense. So that's pretty impressive.
You want to know the worst thing about when I got home? I got recovery candy, and I
Nice.
put it up to my room, and I've been sleeping downstairs because my head won't roll over on my bed, and that's when I have my cast. When I finally got back to my room, all my candy was eaten by Caleb. And he didn't try to hide it. He had the wrappers on my bed, on my desk. Like, that was for me. He didn't have a surgery.
So what did you say?
I couldn't say much. He was just mumbling because I couldn't move my upper lip out till today.
Well, thank you guys for doing this and participating in this and sharing so openly.
Thank you.
We did it.
To watch video from any of our previous Powering Through sessions, visit poweringthrough.org, or to learn more about National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, NCHS, visit nchswecare.com.